let's go back to where haute couture comes from. When did it start?
Well, it started as an appellation, a free appellation, for the couturiers in Paris, which showed their collection in the calendar of the Chambre syndicale. If they are registered, they can be called haute couture. It's not an obligation, it's a tradition.
And what was the use for them to be part of haute couture rather than being...
Well, there was no interest. Ready-to-wear didn't exist, so they had to be in the calendar. They had no choice if they wanted to export, if they wanted to be very visible. They were showing in couture and with the haute couture appellation.
Why does it exist only in France?
Because it's only in France that we had this idea on the 14th of December 1910 to separate couture and confection. In 1968, the Chambre syndicale was called la Chambre syndicale de la couture et de la confection pour dames et fillettes. It's only in 10 that they split.
And what's the difference between haute couture and the rest?
Well, couture is on your order and on your measures, and prêt-à-porter or confection is all-made.
What is for a house the interest being haute couture?
Well, it shows a savoir-faire, which is very specific, and interest a clientele, which is very international and generally very rich.
And what about the calendars? Why is there a specific calendar for haute couture different from the ready-to-wear?
Well, why was there a calendar? Because up to 1943, the Chambre syndicale was not regulating the shows. It was a specific organization called PICE, which was regrouping the most important couturiers who wanted to be protected against copy. And the PICE, which was first presided by Madame Vionnet and then by Madame Besançon Wagner, who was president of Maguirouf, the PICE was as important as the Chambre syndicale. It's when the Germans, during the war, wanted to know more about the Chambre and start regulation and discussions, Madame Besançon Wagner was convoked at the same time Mr. Lelong was president of the Chambre. And with the war, the things changed. The PICE, that's P-A-I-S, disappeared, and the Chambre syndicale took over. Now, even before and after the crash of 1929, the things had first changed because couture was competitive. It was the only industry. It was an immense employer. The couturiers had 1,000, 2,000 workers, and on the contrary, confection was very artisanal. But when the prices tripled, quadrupled because of the crash, suddenly the couture was not competitive anymore. And what was then necessary was to sell the creation. And all the buyers of the world, which were coming, etc., gradually started buying pieces to be copied in their own countries. So Balenciaga, Chanel, Dior, Philippe Vennet, the stores in America, but elsewhere in Italy, etc., were buying 3 pieces of Philippe Vennet, 4 pieces of Balenciaga, 2 pieces of Grès, etc., etc. And this lasted up to the mid-60s, I should say 67, 68, etc., when the ready-to-wear started to be essential. Up to then, the haute couture was only producing for the clients and selling patterns and it was canvas to the stores and manufacturers.
Is haute couture a profession? Is it a métier? Is it a service? Is it a savoir-faire? What is it?
It's first a savoir-faire. Because even in the past, the creation was not the point. If I take Jean Patou, which is a very good example, they had 100 sales ladies, they had 30 fitting rooms, they were starting the show the morning, following the afternoon, finishing at night. And so they had to cover a maximum of possibilities, and they could buy design from many designers. Even Mr. Dior could, before he started Dior, selling some sketches to Jean Patou. So at the time there was no question, it's not the creation which was important, it's to have a good première d'atelier with very good workers which were showing fabulous clothes. So why now? Because they kept the savoir-faire, thank God, and they still have clients. Not the same. In 1913 they were Argentinians. After the War of 14 they were Americans. Then they have been Texans. That was a special American specialty. Then they have been Arabs. Now they are Chinese. And all that changed, but the clientele moved, but the savoir-faire still exists, and houses like Chanel and Dior have a real, very important clientele and make money with couture.
And how does it happen that it's French? How does it happen that it didn't develop elsewhere?
Well, it develops in Paris because Paris has a tradition of creation which really became clear in 1911. The couturiers can be of all nationalities as long as they are in Paris. And they are not Germans, because between 28 and 37, it happened that Germans were not allowed.
So let's come back to the question, why is it so French, that savoir-faire?
Well, many English have it, and Italians too, as you know. But what happens is that they are in Paris, they show in Paris. Armani shows in Paris, Versace in Paris, Elisab shows in Paris, and a few others. And so it became international, which was not the point at the beginning. They were strictly French, and now they are still in Paris, but can be of all nationalities.
You know the history of haute couture so well, Didier. How do you figure out what will be the future of haute couture?
Well, haute couture should go on being, of course, selective, and the house which is invited in the couture calendar should have absolutely the savoir-faire of couture.